Thanks. You can be seated. We are in the book of James. We've been walking through that book, and we're now at the last chapter. It'll still take us a couple of weeks to finish it up, but we have talked about the idea that James challenges people with what does the Christian life look like. It's the first book that the early church would have had. And so James just kind of hits all different kinds of themes and things like that. We've talked about the idea of being a servant, that genuine faith, genuine Christianity is a servant. Genuine faith has this idea with it that it applies the Word of God. It's quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. It does not look with prejudice at people. It does not slander. It does not attack others. It handles the trials and testings and temptations that come with life. So James throws out a whole bunch of things, and last week we talked about the idea of the shortness of this thing that we call life. And that often we take it for granted because we have this Americanized version of it. And we're going to see that again today. We're going to see how our American kind of mindset really hurts us in the way that we approach life. James, in this last chapter, starts with dealing with the issue of wealth and rich people in particular. And I know that as we read it, some of you are going to look at it and you're going to go, oh, you know what, I'm not a rich person. But I think when we're all said and done, you're going to realize, no, we're incredibly rich as far as material possessions go, being an American. So James, I want you to understand, as he talks about this, he's really talking to us too. There's a lot of great lessons in here. If you know me and you've been around here any length of time, we don't spend a lot of time talking about money. We don't. We have offering boxes in the back. We've always believed that God's people take care of God's work, and we have watched God faithfully do that for 30 some odd years here. So we don't, but again, we're a Bible church, so when we're teaching and preaching through the Bible in a deal like this, and we come across these issues, then we deal with it. So this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of riches and wealth and prosperity and those kinds of things. Let me give you a little background to this passage so you understand what we think may be happening. James is the pastor at Jerusalem. And one of the things that's happening at Jerusalem about the time that he's writing this is that Rome is starting to persecute Christians. And they're doing that a couple of ways. They're walking in, much like Saul of Tarsus was. They would walk into synagogues. They would walk into churches where assemblies where Christians were gathered. And they would haul out people, and they would torture them or kill them or whatever else because they were calling themselves Christian. This was starting in Jerusalem about the time James was writing this. In particular, what was happening was, as this started to happen to the church, people were getting nervous. So people were trying to get ready for that persecution, that stuff that was coming. You need to understand, because that's going to lay the groundwork really for the next couple of Sundays as well, and when we talk about the coming of the Lord and things like that. So what's happening is these people are kind of looking at it going, oh, the end is near, the end is near. And what they're doing is they're starting to prepare for the end financially. They're starting to prepare for the end in their family. And what's going to happen here is when the Christians are persecuted and they pull them out and they persecute them, Rome is coming in and then seizing all of their assets. So what's happening is these people, all the things that they've accumulated, all the things that they have, they're losing. And that's starting to happen. And so we don't know if that's kind of the thinking as James writes this to this letter that's kind of going to be circulated out. So with that in mind, let's look at James chapter 5 and the first verse. Here's what he says. Go to now. This is a way of saying, hey, pay attention, listen up. Okay? You rich men. and women, but you understand, okay? Weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Now, what's interesting is this is incredibly powerful language. The idea of weeping is a term that they used when you heard that somebody you loved passed away and all of a sudden you started crying out. That's the word. Howl, literally the idea of screaming, screeching is literally a literal translation here. He says, you rich people, he said, weep like you've lost somebody and scream like everything is collapsing around you for your miseries. This is the idea of struggles, difficulties, hardship, pressures, everything's kind of that, and this is what's interesting, that shall come upon you. He said, you need to understand things are, and again, if this is happening in Jerusalem, things are starting to collapse down around you, and you need to get serious about it because this is literally the language. They're put in tenses in the Greek language where this is happening and it is going to continue to happen. And then he goes on to say this, your riches are corrupted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you. And you shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You have heaped treasure together for the last days. Your riches are corrupted. Literally, it's the idea of spoiled. And in the view here is literally food, because here's what happened. As people were thinking the end is coming, they started to kind of stockpile food. Now, again, remember, this is not a culture with refrigeration. This is not a culture with canned goods. So those of you who camp, not RV, camp. Those of you who camp, I want you to think about going on a camping trip where nothing can be in a can and nothing can be preserved and you don't have a cooler. Now, you're pretty limited in what food you have at that point, aren't you? Because most stuff is going to spoil. Well, here's the idea. They were hoarding that kind of stuff. So in other words, it was going to spoil. But they were so worried and concerned about the end that they started stockpiling this stuff. And then it says, your garments are moth-eaten. It says, look, again, it was a culture where you didn't have a closet full of clothes. It was kind of like when we were in PNG. You walked into a hut, basically the clothes that they owned were the clothes that they were wearing. They might have one other shirt. Because in that culture, with the humidity and everything else, clothing didn't last very long. In the same way, they didn't have a lot of clothes, so what would happen is they started gathering up clothes to be able to have extra clothes. So much so that it was sitting there and the moths were eating. And then he goes on to say, your gold and silver is cankered. And the rust of them shall be a witness against you. You're going, okay, no, wait a minute. I know gold and silver doesn't rust. No, you need to understand, in this culture, often with their coins, they would add other metals. And he says, look, you need to understand that stuff, even that stuff is starting to lose its value. He goes on to say, the rust of them will be a witness against you. The idea is that it is that which you are holding on to is actually going to hurt you in the end. And again, this is what was happening, because what would happen? If you were brought into Rome and said, deny Jesus or you'll lose everything. If you didn't have anything, it's really easy to go ahead. Take nothing from me because I got nothing. But if you've got a bunch of stuff, now that's going to be a witness against you. Now all of a sudden you're going to be afraid of losing your stuff. And he goes on to say, and this is what's really interesting in this passage, they shall eat your flesh as it were fire. He has now taken a tangible object, gold and silver, and he's personalized it. Now it's the idea of that intangible, or that tangible object now has human qualities, where it's eating your flesh. It's alive. It's something that actually has life against you, and it's going to destroy you, as it were fire. He goes on and says, you've heaped together treasure for the last days. Or you're all worried about the future, and you're building up all of this stuff, and you're depending on all of this stuff, and it's actually going to hurt you more than it's going to help you. And then he goes on. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, cries. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of the Sabbath. That's a fascinating description of God. We'll get into that in a second. You have lived in pleasure on the earth, and you have been wanton. You have nourished your hearts as in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. Now, this gets really complicated to us because we're like, what in the world is he talking about? Here's what was happening. In this culture, if you owned, it was all about titles and lands. And so when you owned a lot of land, or you owned a lot of sheep, or you owned a lot of animal, what would happen is there would always be harvest time. So for sheep, there would be the sheep shearing time. There would be for farmers, it would be harvest. We just came off a harvest. And you know how this works. You can run your farm fine until harvest. And then what happens at harvest? Well, there are too many jobs and not enough people, so you go and you find people, usually retired people, and you go, will you drive a combine for me? Will you drive a tractor? Will you do this for me? Can you help us out during harvest? Because that's when you needed the help. Well, this culture was much the same. What would happen is, when you got to harvest time or sheep shearing time or those times, you would get usually day laborers, is the way for us to think about it. You would get people who would come in and they would work for you for that day, and at the end of the day, you paid them. Many of them were on the lower end of the economic spectrum. So this is how they made their living. It was by what they made that day, and then they would show up the next day, and they would get paid at the end of that day, and they get paid at the end of that day. Here's what was happening. These people were becoming so money conscious that they realized, you know what? If I wait till the end of the week to pay you, I can hang on to that money for 5 days. And you know what? Chances are good you may not show up the 5th day. I may not have to pay you. So they started taking advantage of these people. And so much so that these people, by the way, we see this in our culture. We do this with undocumented people in our it's like, well, I will pay you this, and if you complain about it, I will turn you in. And so this is kind of what was happening. And so as they were doing that, what happened is these people literally who were depending on that every single day were all of a sudden now starving to death because they weren't getting paid, and other people were getting rich off of them. And they cried out, and here's what it says, and what you have reaped are entering into the Lord of the Sabbath. That is a very unusual term you don't see very often in Scripture. But when you do see it, you know what it is? It's God assembling an army to go and attack and destroy an enemy. He said, you need to understand, they have cried out and they've got God's attention, and God is ready to take you on. So you need to understand, you've nourished your heart. You're sitting back in pleasure, and you're sitting back in the earth and nourished your heart in the day of slaughter, and you have condemned and killed the just. People who went and worked for you and put in a legitimate day's work for you, you're taking advantage of them. You're not paying them when you're supposed to pay them. You're trying to use them, hanging on to the end of them, and some of them are actually physically dying because they can't support their family. And they can't fight you. So you need to understand they have God's attention because of the way they're dealing with their money and the way they're dealing with their wealth. So that's how he starts this thing out. He's going to go into a section next, and we'll talk about next week about the end times and the day of the Lord and things like that. But he here deals with a lot to do with wealth and money and those kinds of principles. So I want to share some things with you that I think we can learn from this passage, so that we don't make the mistake of these people. Before I do, I want to preface all of what I'm going to say with a couple of things. If you're not careful, sometimes in Christianity we get this mindset that poor is good and wealth and money is bad. That's not a biblical understanding at all. The Bible doesn't say money is the root of all evil. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. Sometimes we get sidetracked with these ideas that, money is wrong. So we miss all of the stories about all of the people that God used. In the life of Paul, you miss the story of Lydia, who was incredibly wealthy, who basically subsidized and helped Paul have most of the ministry that he had, particularly in Philippi. Joseph of Arimathea with Jesus. So sometimes we get this idea that it's wrong to have stuff and that wealth is wrong. Nothing could be further from biblical truth, all right? Misuse of wealth is wrong. Loving money is wrong. Serving money is wrong. Listen to this passage in Proverbs. It is a blessing of the Lord that makes rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. Proverbs says, look, you need to understand that if you are rich, and by the way, let me preface this morning. There's not a person in here that is not rich. And I'll prove that to you when we're all said and done. But there's not a person in here, including those of you high school kids that just got a job, that is not incredibly rich when we start playing that comparison game. So let's understand that what we have as a gift of God is a gift from God. The issue is what we have, how we got it, how we use it. Those are the biblical issues. So that's kind of what we want to wrestle with a little bit today. So let's talk about first principle. You need to understand this idea when we talk about money and riches and that kind of thing. You need to understand that riches are incredibly deceiving. Basically, the difference between poor people and rich people is zeros and commas. The only difference between Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, and me and our bank accounts are zeros and commas. That's it. We both have all of us have bank accounts. They have more zeros and commas in theirs than mine does. That's it. See, they still have money problems too. Their money problems just have more zeros and commas than my money problem. Riches are incredibly deceiving. You go, well, I would love to have their zeros and commas. Okay, you need to understand. You know what comes with their zeros and commas? The same problems that you have minus the zeros and commas. That's all it is. What, to you, $1,000 bill, you get a $1,000 unexpected bill, that may rattle your bank account. But you know what? In theirs, they get rattled by unexpected bills as well. It's the difference is their unexpected bills are $1 million or $10 million or whatever. It's zeros and commas. The Bible says they that compare themselves with themselves are not wise. So first of all, you need to understand, when you play the comparison game, that's a loser. Okay? But since we play it, we're going to play it this morning. We're going to play the comparison game. So let's understand. Last week I used the illustration of chairs, and it resonated, so I'm going to use it again here in a minute with some things. Let's talk about yearly income worldwide for a second. The richest country in the world, the average income of the richest country in the world is Monaco. The average annual salary in Monaco comes out to be about $186,000 a year if you lived in Monaco. The United States, by comparison, the average annual salary, median salary, gross salary across the board in the U.S. comes out to about $70,000 a year. On the world stage, out of 69 countries, we happen to be number 7. There are only 6 places in the world where the annual average gross salary is higher than it is in the United States. Monaco, Switzerland, Bermuda, Norway, Luxembourg, and Ireland are ahead of us. Everybody else is behind us. Our neighbor to the north, up in Canada, their average salary is $48,000 a year, about half of what it is in America. Down in Mexico, our neighbor to the south, average salary is a little over $9,000 a year. We make 7 times what they make in Mexico. You wonder why everybody wants to come across the border? The lowest country in the world happens to be Afghanistan. $500 a year is what those people live off of. We're number 7. You wonder why it is that everybody wants to be in, quote, unquote, America? That's why. Because we have one of the best healthcare system. We have one of the best ability to support people who can't support themselves. We have all kinds of mechanisms and all kinds of programs to do that. Why? Because we happen to be born in the United States. That's where you sit this morning. You just happen to be in America. When we start talking about worldwide income, what does it take for somebody to live off of in the world? I'm going to go back to my chairs. It just makes it easy for you to see it. When we talk about what you make in a day, okay, on a worldwide kind of figure. In the world, if you live on less than $2 a day, we consider you poor. There's a fascinating thing, and I'll send you the link if you want to do it, but the Pew Research Company, what they did is they went in and they put in this massive formula for figuring out worldwide income. And they did the conversion rates on money and exchange and everything else. They go all the way back to 2011 where they have the numbers and everything standardized, and then they do the whole inflation thing and figure out where you are today in 2020 numbers. And you can go in and put in how much you make an hour or a week or a month or a year, and it will tell you where you rate on the world scale. I'm going to just warn you right now, you don't want to do it. Because you'll start to realize just how much you have. A little over 10% of the world lives on less than $2 a day. We consider those people in the world poor. But that's what they make. That's their income on a given day. 50% of the world falls into the next category, where in a given day they make somewhere between $2 and $10 a day. So 60% of the world makes less than $10 a day. These people are considered low income on a worldwide scale. Then we have middle income. These are people who make basically between $10 and $20 a day. There's about 17% of them. So these people are considered middle income, okay, on the worldwide stage right here. Then we have what they consider upper middle income people. About 14% of the world falls into that category. So you take the last half of this share and this dude. These people in this little group right here make somewhere between $20 and $50 a day. Okay? $20 and $50 a day. That's what they make. Then we have what we consider to be the high-income people in the world. Now, we would call them rich. We would call them extremely rich on the world stage. You want to play the comparison game? We're going to play a comparison game. That comes down to 6.8% of the world makes more than $50 a day. 6.8% on the world stage sit in this chair. Let me put this in perspective for you. If you're a high school student working 40 hours a week at minimum wage, you are sitting in this chair. Most of us, if not all of us in here, sit in this chair on the world stage. 92% of the world does not get to sit here. Just us. Here's our problem. We sit in this chair, and because we are low income or low middle income in the United States, we think we're in that chair. Oh, it's so hard to make ends meet. Oh, it's so hard, why would I take that job? They just offer me minimum wage. It's 92% higher than most of the world. Really? Really? Well, it's so hard because I'm way down here. I just don't have it. Whoa. Riches are incredibly deceiving. This is what you need to understand. Because so many times, we spend so much time focusing on this because we have such this narrow little view in not realizing what God has actually given us. We sit here where 92% of the world would love to sit here. Like I say, I'll send you the link, and you can put what you make in. And I'm not on the high end of the spectrum in the U.S. version of this. But I'm going to tell you right now, on the world version of it, my kids working at Best Buy were sitting in this chair at 18 years old. We have got to realize, folks, listen, we have been given so much. We are incredibly rich when we want to talk about money. We have to understand, because we need to be really careful about what James is saying here. Because one of the things that James is saying is, listen, you need to understand, if you're not careful, your riches will hurt you. They will destroy you. They will eat you alive. You need to think about very carefully, how did you get what you have? And what are you going to do with what you have? Because if you don't, what you have will consume you. This is what James is saying to us. He's saying, look, understand, if you're not careful, if you don't handle this thing right, it will hurt you far more than it will help you. So one of the things that you see in this right off the bat is the idea that riches are incredibly deceptive when it comes to the way we think about it. One of the issues that you have to look at, and this is what James talks about here, is how did you get what you got? Remember, we're all sitting here. You saw the numbers last week about how life and how short it is for us. And most of us, a lot of us were in the chairs closer to this end than that end. But as we sit here and we look at this, here's my issue to you. How come you're sitting here? How did you get what you got? Because James says, look, if you did it on the backs of other people, you're going to stand before a God who's ready to go to fight against you. So you better be careful about how you got what you got. You better look at how you treated the people that helped you get in this chair. You want to know who the primary person who's got you in this chair is? God. Because you know what? He could have very easily put you in another country where the total annual income is $500 a year. And you would never sit in this chair. He could have very easily not given you the ability to work, and you would never sit in this chair. All he had to do was let you be born in another country, and chances are good you would never sit in that chair. So everything we have is because of a God who loved us and was generous to us and allowed us to be born into this country and allowed us to live in this country and gave us all of the resources and abilities that we have in this country. And you know what you did to earn that? Zip, zero, zilch. And God has been incredibly good to you from a financial perspective, from a gift perspective, from a talent perspective, from all the things that he's given you. But it is all from him. You need to understand that. Because what happens is, and this is particularly true in rural Iowa, well, you don't understand. I don't understand why everybody's having trouble. I made a bunch of good financial decisions, and that's the reason I am where I am, and that's why I have the farm that I have, and I've worked hard, and da-da-da. Stop. It was God. Period. Well, no. See, my buddy, he didn't make the smart decisions that I made, and, he invested in this, and I watched that go south, and I knew that it would go south because I had the intelligence to not invest in that. Stop. God could have very easily put you in another country, and you would have never had the opportunities you had. Kids, listen to me. Part of the reason that you're able to sit down there is because of things and sacrifices and things like that your parents are making and have made. Yes, it is part of the decisions that you make, but more importantly, it is because you have had people that have helped you and got you through stuff. It's not all about you doing it all and you've done it all and I'm a self-made man. No. It is a gift from God. And everything that you have is his. And he can take it back whenever he wants. Ask Job. We forget this. We forget this. There's a great story. We've been talking about it in Sunday school a couple of weeks ago. The story of David and Nabal and Abigail. 1 Samuel 25. Quick, short version of the story. Basically, David's a fugitive. He's running from Saul. Saul wants to take his life. So as Saul is wanting to pursue him, David is hiding in the mountains with his people. There's a guy in the area by the name of Nabal. Nabal's just a mean, wicked guy. He's self-centered. He's self-focused. He's mean to his employees. He's mean to everybody, including his wife. And Nabal has had a phenomenally good year. He raised sheep. He's in sheep shearing time, so that's where they figure out how much money they got. And Nabal's all excited because it's been a great year. So David's hiding in nearby caves. He sent some of his men over. It's a feast time. They're celebrating the great harvest that they've had. And he says, hey, Nabal, how about sending some extra our way? We talked to your shepherds. We were out there with your shepherds. When people started to want to come and take your sheep, we defended you. We took care of you, Nabal. The reason you have this great feast thing is because we helped you have a great harvest. And Nabal looks at him and says, I don't know who you are. I didn't ask for your help. I didn't need your help. You go back and tell David, I don't even know who the guy is. I'm giving him diddly. So they come back to David and they say, hey, David, here's the deal. Nabal says he ain't doing nothing. David is fit to be tied. He is madder than a wet hen. So David says, let's get me 400 men. Get ready. Strap on your swords. David is so mad, David actually straps on his sword, which happens to be the sword that he used to kill Goliath. And so David now is sitting there and he's ready to go and he says, let's go. And he's going to go in and this is what David says in a passage. When he's done, there's not going to be anything alive. when I'm done. Now, taking 400 men, taking an army to go take over a little farm area, that's like massively overkill. Abigail, Nabal's wife, hears about this, and she knows this is over. So she comes up with this phenomenal plan, and she puts together a huge buffet. Basically puts it on wheels, decides to go meet. David comes down the valley. He's ready to wipe out Nabal. Abigail, in the front, sees him and says, "Hi. You're David, aren't you? You're the awesome guy I've heard about. You're the guy that loves God. You're the guy that trusts God for everything. You're the guy who listens to God. You know what? I heard that you were coming. I made a feast for you and all your army. I want you guys to have a great, great, great feast here at our behalf. By the way, I wish you would have come to me instead of Nabal, because basically, here's what she says, because my husband's an idiot. And I know that you follow God and that you don't want this to be your legacy and blah, blah, blah. So I'm trusting you. And so here, I prepared all of this for you. Meanwhile, Nabal is having a party. And he is drunk as a skunk. He ends up basically plastered for the whole night. David looks at Abigail and says, "You know what? Thank you, and I'm going home." Turns around and heads home. Next morning, Nabal sobers up. Abigail comes to him and says, "Hey, thought I'd tell you what was going to what happened last night. I made a feast for David. Because, see, he had an army that had come down the valley, and they were going to kill every one of you at the feast." And I mean, all of a sudden, he realizes how close he came to losing his life. But she intervened. Fast forward the story. You know what happens in the end? 10 days later, God takes Nabal's life. As soon as she's done for her mourning period, she marries David, who's smart enough to realize this is a gal you want to keep, goes and says, "Come on, I want you to be my wife," and Abigail and David end up getting married. Here's the thing. Nabal came to that thing thinking it was all about him, not realizing the only reason you got to shear sheep is because David's men were protecting you. You had a whole lot of people helping you, and you never gave them any credit for it, and you know what? You didn't realize that you got where you are because of all the other people behind you. Listen to me. You and I need to understand whatever we have is a gift from God, and it is the investment of the people that are behind us. They're the ones who have contributed to any successes we have. I stand here today because I have a whole series of people who invested in my life to help me make the decisions that I made, to help me get the skills that I needed to get. It is not about, oh, you've done all. No. It is all God. It is all God. And you need to understand that. Everything that you have is a gift from God. The other thing is this. It's the idea that, first of all, we have to understand wealth's deceptive. Secondly, we've got to understand the source of it. We got to make sure that we didn't come across it in ways that were not pleasing to God. And then you've got to remember you're responsible for what you do with it. God didn't give it to you for you. He gave it to you as a blessing, but he gave it to you as a blessing to meet your needs, to meet the needs of other people, to use it to share the gospel. In other words, he gave it so that you could impact other people. I think the principle that comes out of this is the idea of generosity. See, what the people should have done in the book of James is they should have been celebrating their wealth, if you will, with the people who worked for them that helped them. They should have been generous. One of the things that I think is true of Christianity, it's incredibly generous. And it's generous to people who don't deserve it. Isn't that what salvation was all about for us? So I really think generosity needs to be a part of your Christian maturity and your Christian growth. Lord willing, this week, my wife and I are going to get today. We're going to get away. We have a little restaurant that we're planning on going to. I'm going to walk into a restaurant. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to look at a piece of paper. I'm going to order off that menu. You know how many people have pitched in to make that happen? Somebody had to buy the restaurant. Somebody has to foot the bill. Somebody has to order the stuff. Some truck driver has to deliver the stuff. In addition to that, somebody's got to cook it. Some waiter or waitress has got to come up and serve it to me. And then they ask me, is it all right? Is there anything we need to do? You need more water? You need more coffee? They go in hand and foot, and then when it's all said and done, I'm going to get up and walk away. I'm not even going to worry about doing dishes. The only opportunity that I have to say thank you for all those people and all that stuff is a tip. I believe that Christians ought to be the most generous tippers on the planet. Why? Because we have somebody serving us. Here's what I will say to you. If you, like me, put your bill, we put everything on a credit card, we pay the bill at the end of the month. I don't have a problem with credit cards, I have a problem with interest. So I don't pay interest, but I use credit cards. So for me, it's all going to come to, here's the thing. If you have never gotten, and I have a text alert on all my credit cards. You know, if I spend over an X amount, it sends me a note. If I, every transaction comes through on my phone, okay? And if there's one that the company questions, they send me a thing and say, hey, we noticed this charge. Is this correct? If you've never gotten hey, we noticed this tip is higher than the normal average, is this correct? If you've never gotten one of those, it will remind you of the idea of being generous. Because it's like the credit card company's going, whoa, this isn't normal. The good Christian shouldn't be normal. I want to be above normal. I want to be beyond normal. I want a waitress or a waiter to be able to walk away from that table and go, boy, that person is generous. Why? Because Christians should be generous. You have people that have served you all year long. What are you going to do for them? What are you doing for them? Look, I'm an online shopper. For the first time in 20 plus years, I didn't go to Black Friday. And you're going, oh. No. Look, I ordered it all ahead of time. I was buying stuff on Monday instead of waiting until Friday. Okay, so I got it all bought. I'm looking at the ads going, I already got everything I wanted for Black Friday. First time, in fact, my kids are going, is Dad okay? Because I always, but this year I was like, I didn't need to. But my UPS guy, that poor guy. Once in a while I'll get a girl, but most of the time, guy, FedEx brought in the Chewy box yesterday. I just feel sorry for the guy. The dog food, 40 pounds of dog food because I don't want to carry it from the car to the shop. He just drops it off of my hand. I started realizing that, the UPS truck is not air conditioned. And I'd watch these guys, and I'm near the end of the route, I'd watch these guys come to my house, and they're just soaking wet this summer. So we started a deal in our house where every time they showed up, we had water bottles just for the UPS guy in the refrigerator. And there's the point when Claire was over here and she'd see him, she'd run to the refrigerator and grab 2 bottles and take it out to him. My neighbor, who's a Christian, does the same thing. In fact, it became a joke. He said, I went over to your neighbors, he said, and they asked me if I needed water. I'm like, well, I just got 2 from the Thomases, so no, I'm good. But it's the idea of, wait a minute, you know what? Why I have an opportunity to help him, to serve him, to say thank you to him. Why? Because he's doing so much for me. Part of my enjoyment is being able to be at home and get that stuff. We are incredibly wealthy. Incredibly. We need to be incredibly generous too. We need to think about how we can serve and help and be generous to those who are serving and helping us and to complete strangers. Somebody in this church a year or so ago challenged us with the idea of, I buy my wife flowers every time I'm at Walmart. It's $5. Okay? It's $5. And so somebody said they had bought flowers, and they bought flowers for a stranger, walked down the parking lot and handed it to him. I thought, that sounds like a cool idea. I did that. Saw an older couple. They were in the handicapped parking lot. She had just gotten into her car, and I walked up and said, here, take these home and enjoy them. She would look at me like, really? Okay. Her husband's looking at me going, yeah, thanks. Thanks. But you know what? This is what I'm talking about. Look, we have the opportunity to do those kinds of things because we've been given so much. And instead of focusing it all on us like the people in James's day were doing, thinking, oh no, the end of the world's coming, I got to get no, be generous with it. Don't put your confidence in that. Your confidence is in a God who has given you the things that he's given you. So as we talk about it, as we wrap it up, here's what I conclude. God has been generous to us and made us incredibly rich as Americans. We've got to realize that our wealth is a gift from God. It's meant to be enjoyed, meet our needs, and allow us to meet the needs of others. We've got to be generous in our approach to the things God gave us. Be generous with your time, with your talents, with your God-given gifts, because they are all a gift from a generous and very loving God. Let's pray. Lord, help us. It's so easy to focus on us. Help us this week to focus on others. And help us to use the resources that we have to make a difference in the world that you've put us in this week. These things we ask.